All right. We're
Hello,
streaming.
hello. Hey, Mercurian.
We've we've made it here, you guys. It's been a
We,
long journey.
yes, it has. Mercury is still so conjoined to Mars. Um, we're waiting on that triplicity in term coming up here. Yeah. It's been a week. How has your week been?
My week was okay. I'm I have just come out of a tertiary progressed new moon, which if you guys aren't using tertiary progressions, they're so good. Like please, it's mm, they're so good. And it's like that. It was balsamic, it was in that dark, but we're waxing now for another just over 2 years. You get like 12 of them as your progressed sun moves through a sign. So I'm ready to face the next lunar cycle. But I definitely feel like I'm coming out of the cocoon of the balsamic moon phase.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
also that time of year.
Yeah, same. I just had my secondary progressed new moon at the
That
end.
is
Yeah, at the end of January. And it's really interesting to see, even though it's like the moon is still so combust, just the difference between her moving out of the sun's heart and I don't know. I can't wait for her to regain visibility in Taurus. That's gonna be great.
that's quite a moment for you.
Yeah, we're gonna pretend that she doesn't move right into my 12th house after that happens. But yeah, it'll be fun. Mars just this last week like squared my sun. There's been drama and of course my right eye. I had some kind of ailment, some bizarre, rare infection of my tear duct, and the doctor was perplexed, like, what?
Mm,
Thank you for the horror read
of
that you cast. Um,
course.
yeah, because I needed to go to the doctor and I was hesitant. Um, yeah, so yeah, it's been a busy week, but good busy. Thank the gods for the good busyness. And we've got this lovely overcast with rain, and I just adore this beautiful weather so much. It's so nice. Um,
Yeah, that's nice. It's been warmer the past few days too, which has felt relieving for
yeah,
sure.
it's interesting the opposites that we have our climate.
Yeah.
I've been quite concerned because it was like 73 degrees for like
Hmm.
3 weeks and it's January, like it was January, like it's supposed to be cold.
Hmm.
Well, I'm just glad we're getting some phlegmatic weather. Truly, yeah, because the land needs it.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, well, the world's been going through a lot in the last few weeks, but we have made it here. And if you're here, I know I think I can speak for both of us in saying we're very grateful to have you here listening and to be here um doing our final reading
Yeah.
through of Rhetorius the Egyptian.
If
So it's a big moment.
Yeah, if
Yeah.
you have been here with us from the jump, thank you so much. This has been a really fun journey. I know we didn't read the entire book cover to cover. The last sections, the last chapters of the book are about quite specific contexts. It's not so much about I don't want to say it's not about delineation, but it's how delineation has shown up in different charts. So
Mhm.
if you want to look into that, feel free to do so. But we've really covered the major interpretive points that were what that he sought to convey. Um,
Mhm.
and today we're going to wrap up with his complete topical examination of a nativity.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is in many ways just kind of like the pinnacle of all of the things we've talked about in the last year, all of the, charts we've looked at and discussions we've had, throughout the whole year. This doesn't just exist in the podcast. This has really been a journey for both of us and discovering what, these techniques look like for yeah, for this author of this mysterious compendium. And yeah, it's been really exciting, and I feel like tonight's a really exciting step for both of us in like, you know, reviewing some of this material, because I remember I made these notes maybe this was last September when I went through this chapter and like really sat down with all of these point by point steps in having to, where we go from here after we've learned the basics. What do we do with all of that? So it's been in my head for a while. I'm really excited to get into talking about what these different points are and how they work together and the system that he is building up for us to look at. Because one of the biggest things that, you know, we can kind of bring up when you want to talk about like learning ancient astrology is like, well, was there ever like some divine system? Was this just all composed by some original person? Did it develop slowly over time? And, I know also like in our podcast that we did on the astrology podcast, we talked a lot about like beginning your learning journey and like where to move from like different sources and like how this stuff gets transmitted. Like this has been a huge part of this whole journey. And we really do have someone that wrote out a system, like a
Yeah.
very detailed and a very lengthy, explicit system. And we're going to talk about it. So here we go.
Yeah. And for those of you who are around for the 2022 KazimiCon, we opened this series by reading through Levant Laszlo's delineation, I mean, translation of Rhetorius. And we'll get into those quotes here soon enough. But we opened this series with that, and we're going to come back and close our series with that today. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. This has been a really valuable learning journey, and it's been a fun one for sure to explicate this text.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this chapter is going to give us, yeah, I think a lot of like closure
Mhm.
because we've had so many discussions about like, well, what does he really mean here? Or what is this alluding to? Or why does he talk about this? But this gives us really the context for why actually certain little things were brought up in certain ways or in maybe less clear ways in other chapters. So it just, yeah, it in so many ways is like the golden nugget of this whole book.
Yeah.
And yeah, we're gonna
I
say
was just
something.
I was just agreeing, like the golden nugget. Yeah.
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 And so that's also why perhaps this does exist in, well, altogether in very few places, which is maybe to say that, yeah, this specific chapter is very like sacred because we don't have it existing in many, places. Of course, that can be said about the whole compendium together. But what's interesting about this chapter is that it has sort of existed in a few different versions and been passed around and kind of slightly altered or changed in a few ways. So there was a later Latin version of it that sort of had certain pieces of it or reordered certain of the steps or like the bigger procedures, like steps in the procedure, had them in a different order. Or there was a later Byzantine compiler that kind of rewrote their own version of it. So there's a lot of ways that this whole doctrine of like here are like the 7 paragraphs about how you're gonna like really read a chart, which goes to show that the system has existed and was transmitted for a while. It didn't just wasn't just written by him. There were people that used these chapters for several centuries. And it also goes to show that, I mean, with the whole idea of that changing, that malleability, it's like everyone, we have all these concepts and base points that we agree on and these base things, but there is a lot of personal element to the way that he's going to present something first compared to someone else who might say, well, I always look at this first, right? So it's great that we're getting all these really key pieces, but also, this was his take. And so it did sort of slightly change with later people that compiled it or edited it somehow.
Yeah, yeah. And those changes, while small, are still very significant. At the root of it, we're doing the same thing. But I do also think it's interesting that this chapter is kind of just like, I don't want to say thrown in, but it's tucked really within like the center of the text. It's
Hmm.
not like this is his opening where he's like, before we get into all of these things, I'm going to tell you step by step how I delineate a chart. It's not like this is the end where
Hmm.
he's saying, we've covered all of these things. Now I'm going to show you my procedure. It's
Yeah.
just within there, at least within the Greek text that Holden has translated. And brief shout out to the AFA for allowing us to use this text in this really, really
Or
fun project. Yes, feel free to order your copy online, or at their in-person store in Arizona. Yeah, so thank you guys so much. If anybody of the AFA is watching this,
yeah.
we appreciate you. And additionally, thanks to Levante Laszlo, who has provided us with some valuable information on the context of Rhetorius as a figure and some additional translations of the same principle that we're about to outline in this chapter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've given it a lot of preamble. I don't know if there's really anything more to say.
I think I think we're ready to dive in. You want to kick us off?
Sure. All right. So we're reading chapter 54, and so this
Page
was,
32.
yeah. Um, Now, one thing I will just explicitly say is that basically halfway through the first examination, so the whole chapter is broken into 7 examinations, and they each contain several sub steps and like procedures to do that usually all have a theme that are related to each other. Also shout out hello to the people that are joining in. Hello to Katoch and Tiamat and Paloma. Thank you guys for being here. Um,
Yes,
the
thank you so much.
Yeah.
Feel free to chip in at any point with
Hmm.
comments. So glad
Yeah.
to have you here.
Hmm. So, yeah, basically we have these different examinations, and the second half, the last half of the first examination, the second and the third, I believe, are all missing from the Greek, which means we don't have it from the Antiochus text, we don't have it from Rhetorius. This after we get, and we'll say where halfway through the first one that it switches to a later Latin manuscript that has these sections that we're missing is filled in. We'll say when that filling in happens. And then from the fourth onward was all in the Greek. Um, so we have very high reason to believe that those second and third examinations as they're filled in are what was originally in the Greek. But nevertheless, they are from a later version, so they might have been slightly different than what Rhetorius wrote, but they still give us a whole heck of a lot of great information. But yeah, I think that is it on preambling. So, chapter 54, the topical examination of the horoscope. So he says, and also, I'll just say one more thing. I don't think we're gonna read all of it though. That's the
We're
thing, is
not.
that we're
We're
gonna,
not.
yeah, we'll start
Yeah.
off and then
So I'm gonna
yeah,
tack something onto that.
yeah, go
So
on.
what we're gonna do, we have kind of isolated the core components of what he's saying, like step by step, look to this, look to that, look to this.
Hmm.
We have isolated those from digressions about different configurations that lead to given outcomes. And the reason we have done that, for example, he mentions about the lot of fortune and whether it's averse to its ruler, whether fortune falls in a dark house and is beheld by malefics. Talks about what that means in a nativity. if you've been watching, you know that we've talked about these things. And if you haven't been watching, we have talked about these things already.
Mhm.
So we've covered quite a bit of ground on the more specifics of how different configurations manifest. Here we're really focused on the steps, not so much about the delineation element of it.
Mhm.
And there will be times where you'll see us digress to touch on that because something important or a little bit foreign comes into the picture. But for the most part, keep that in mind that these are segments of the text.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so
Okay.
with that, yeah, no, I know. I'm like, there are just little things to say because there's, yeah, it's, we'll get into them, but we'll start off reading and then just let our discussion carry us along. So the topical examination is made as follows. At the outset, it's necessary to determine good births and bad births, and consequently, the dorophories of the lights, whether they're in dorophory with those of their sect or with those of the opposite sect. I kind of want to pause real quick because one, he's using dorophoria as the first opening technique of the chart, which is very interesting. When we looked at that chart, we also highlighted how we believe dorophoria can happen for stars that are of the opposite sect for the luminary that could be receiving the spears, which isn't something super explicitly stated in all the text. Sometimes they say it's like an out of sect dorophory. Some people say that, but it's interesting to note here that this is coming out first and that this has to do with good and bad births. He also says right after that, and whether they, so the lights, presumably, whether they are in masculine signs or in feminine quadrants of the chart, whether the lights are well connected or disjunct with each other and with the ascendant, and whether the one is in a masculine sector and the other in a feminine or vice versa, for there's a considerable effect from these positions. So this is interesting because we get all these really early things that we learn about like sect in terms of, diurnal, nocturnal, the hemisphere that things are in, the polarity of the sign things are in. So we're getting the vibe. He says that we're examining good and bad births, and the process here basically is through the analysis of the sect of the chart. So that's pretty interesting.
Yeah,
Um,
I will say it is a possibility this chapter immediately follows his chapters on Dorophoria. So it is a possibility that it was just fresh in his mind, and that's why it shows up so early on in this text. But at the same time, I don't think that we can neglect the fact that this is the first thing that he
mhm,
talks about before dignity by any sign, before the sect of the chart itself.
mhm,
Um, and he's saying you need to be able to evaluate all of these things
mhm,
together to determine the Dorophoria of the chart.
mhm,
And as you mentioned earlier, that ties back into that episode where we talked about how everybody has people who will support them. I won't say everybody, most people have some kind of person who will support them, friends who will help you in a trying time or some some kind of relationship with protection and aid from people.
mhm. Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Which
yeah.
is also a big question about like viable births that we'll see in a moment of like charts that indicate whether the infant can live or not. But it's interesting to see that like dorophoria is wrapped in as a concept that's supportive of that. And that I think touches on what we highlighted, that dorophoria can grant protection in many levels, not just royal eminence, but in literally just, do you have people around you? Do you have
Right.
parents or support from people that can care to raise you up?
Mhm.
The other thing is also just the whether the luminaries are aspecting each other and aspecting the ascendant. So luminaries in dark houses or when the moon's in a phase separating from new or full, that's also indicating that there's less stability or viability or power in the birth.
And part of that probably explicitly relates to the lot of fortune, right? Because if you have the moon adverse to the sun, the lot of fortune will therefore be adverse to the ascendant. So keep that in mind too,
Mm,
that might undercurrent this comment.
yeah, that's a great point.
Then
Um,
examine the
you want to go
rulers.
next?
Oh, yeah. I was just going to jump in.
Yeah.
Um, then examine the rulers of the triplicity of the light of the sect, of the ascendant, and their dispositors, the rulers of the terms of the sun and the moon, and the dodecatomores of the stars. So we're covering a lot of ground here just in this one paragraph, right? Don't just look at the triplords of the sect light and the ascendant. Look at the rulers. The
Of the triplicity rulers.
rulers. Yeah, yeah. So there's layers, babe. Yeah. And then he moves on, examined a lot of fortune and of spirit and their rulers. He goes into some different positions that they can be configured within the chart. We're going to glaze over
Mhm.
that, unless like you want to come back to it, you feel free.
Basically, just that when the rulers of the lots are badly configured, when they're under the beams, it detracts from the viability or power of the nativity. And
Mhm.
then he says something similar along the lines of analyzing the conjunction, where the prenatal new moon or full moon, the you're looking at the ruler and the ruler of its terms, and that presumably those analyses are going on for the same reason of the syzygy, that we're checking and tracking the viability, the power, the strength of the life force from the lots and from the syzygy, because they're all the helegical places, which we know maybe by this
Yeah.
point. Yeah.
And then he proceeds to and says, now look to the triplicity rulers of the prenatal syzygy. So again, triplicity lords as a really fundamental element of conceptualizing the nativity and delineating the life of a native.
Hmm.
Right out the bait gate.
Hmm.
Um, yeah,
I also just want to throw in now, we've just transitioned into where the Latin manuscript is taking off.
yeah,
So we are no longer reading directly from the Greek.
yes. Thank you for mentioning that. My
Yeah,
recent
yeah.
comment about triplicity lords came from the Latin.
Hmm. Same thing
Um,
for me about the syzygy. And yeah, that's it for the first exposition. So the first one, basically it's Dorphories for the sun and moon, if it's with stars that are in or out of sect, and then their quadrants and signs and those polarities of the quadrants and signs. Then lights being aspecting each other, the ascendant, then the trigon rulers of the lights and the ascendant, their rulers, their term rulers. What?
I just was tacking on like and their rulers.
Oh yeah. I
Yeah,
mean it could be it's I think it could be saying they're the domicile rulers of the trigon rulers, but in any case, do that anyway. Just while we're talking about everything you can do when you're looking at a chart, do that too. But he also could mean the domicile lords and term lords of the sun and moon, and then the 12 parts of all the stars. Then the lots next, fortune and spirit, their rulers, the syzygy, its rulers. Basically, just consider all the rulers, like all the rulers of those points, and do they look like it's making a viable nativity? That's
hmm.
it. So basically, that's it. Sun, moon, ascendant, fortune, spirit, syzygy. Look at their
That's it.
rulers. How are they configured? Method
Yeah,
one. Done.
that's it. We just rattled off like 12 different things, but that's it.
But that makes sense though, because we
Yeah,
know those are the helegical places, the places of life that are
right.
used in primary directions. They show how the first breaths of the nativity support a life that can be lived with good health and happiness. So
Mhm.
we get it right here. We start there. So to the second examination,
Yeah.
one should again examine the rulers of the triplicity, especially the luminary of the sect and the ascendant, and then he adds the MC here. Lest perchance there in their fall or under the beams for 7 days also. Whew. I'm gonna talk about the days of the moon for a quick minute here, you guys. The days of the moon. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think it's so fascinating that he incorporates whether or not a planet emerges or sets from within the beams within 7 days of the birth in the same exact way you hear people talk about when a planet stations direct or retrograde within 7 days of the birth. This is showing that phase is not just limited to stations, you know? You could even do that for a planet gaining speed or reaching its apogee, within 7 days of the birth.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. This is,
Tell us about the moon. Tell us about the phases of the moon.
well, I'm not going to say too much. All I'm going to say, first, I'll just say to that, like, absolutely 100%. These are all the heliacal phases of the planets, and they were all observed and tracked just as much as the other things. The discussion about heliacal phases these days is very regrettably little. Um, but we'll get to that when we talk about more things with phases. But yeah, those are all the heliacal phases, and they were specifically looked at on the third, seventh, and 40th days from the birth, and even in converse time as well. Usually for 7 days. They didn't necessarily look 3 and 40 days before, but they did for seven at least. Um, Now, there's an upcoming article to be published in the Cayley Review, which is a quarterly astrological journal that I am the editor for, that is all about the reconstruction of these days of the moon, which are referenced several times in this chapter. And it is a whole theory that these analyzing the sky and everything going on those third, seventh, and 40th days was a whole approach to doing astrology that was used in horary, that was used in elections, that was used in nativities. So to me, it's no surprise that we're getting, of course, some comment about the heliacal phases within 7 days of the birth, because that was a huge thing. Like when a planet's becoming visible or disappearing within a week from someone's birth, it categorizes your whole life, your whole existence. I can just say that from experience, watching and seeing that. People that are born when Mercury is rising from, it's like, it's huge. So, yeah, it's great to see that show up here right at the beginning of the second configuration. Um, After that, um,
After that, he talks about investigate the bright stars and the bright degrees. When they are present in the ascendant, the midheaven, the descendant, or IC in the same degree with one of the seven planets. What is he
period.
talking about here? Piranha Talanta, right? He's talking about stars that are on your midheaven, stars on your ascendant. If you have a planet on an angle with a star also there, what does that mean for a nativity? And he gets into that even further in the future.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so do not neglect the bright and dark degrees.
Yeah. And I also just see it as huge here that, again, we get the discussion of planets in phase and fixed stars as the first things he's looking at after you're assessing the life force. Because I know for myself, those are two huge things that like I've just had a major shift in my practice towards looking at. And coming back to this and seeing those things in like the first area, I'm like, it makes sense to me because the fixed stars on your natal angles do characterize so much about your birth, and of course that are with each of the planets. And yeah, I think it's really interesting that we're going to get even more explicit about Purana Talanta, and you know stars co-rising off of the ecliptic in a little bit. But he is emphasizing here the first thing is those ones that are angular, because when someone's got a bright fixed star on a natal angle, that's huge. So yeah. Then he just says something about the moon here. He's saying, oh, especially when um
Yeah,
sorry.
he's saying like, especially if the moon or the ascendant ruler does not aspect that planet, like look to this because this can seriously mitigate a delineation that you would otherwise make.
Yeah. So that's the second consideration, basically. Phases within 7 days. Um, Important things going on with the luminaries, like having fixed stars there, fixed stars on the natal angles, and then another comment about vitality with like the ruler of the moon and the ascendant.
Mhm.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. Um, Now he gets like really into the moon here.
This is moon
The
time.
Yeah, in this third consideration. So looking at everything broadly, all of these different things we've named. Now let's focus on the container for life, right? The moon. So did you want to kick us off with that third consideration?
Sure, we'll see how far I go before we stop to talk. Um, or if we just don't want to say it all. But basically, he's saying look at everything with the moon. So the third consideration is that you investigate the moon and her ruler, the ruler of her terms, the ruler of the triplicity, her position on the third and the seventh and the 40th days, her conjunctions and separations and apparitions, and the latitudes of the winds. Um, I'll say before that, her conjunctions and separations and apparitions, which means they want you to track at what degree the moon is heliacally rising in the cycle you were born under. That degree is very important. There's other texts that talk about degrees where planets make heliacal risings. Ptolemy even makes a comment about that. Um, and the latitudes of the winds, which we can understand as her position above or below the ecliptic, aka her relationship to her nodes, which then the next thing he says is her nodes. Um, and then he just has a comment that's very interesting after that. He says, and her nodes, and the revolutions and courses through the nativity.
Mhm.
What could he be talking about by saying that, other than looking at where she's moving after the birth?
Mhm. Progressing the moon. And this is
Mm,
an idea that he comes back to again um, later in these sections is progressions, quite
mm,
frankly. Yeah, yeah. So interesting, interesting.
hmm And then yeah, increasing, decreasing in light, her 12th part, if she's slow or fast, so her apogee or perigee. And if she's in the last degrees of a sign.
Now
And
that is
that's
so interesting.
mm-hmm,
Like if she's in the last degrees of the sign, because you hear chit chat about anaretic degrees and what that means. And there's been conjecture about whether that's just in reference to the fact that the final terms of the signs, like whether that came from the fact that the ending terms of a sign is typically malefic ruled. But here, this is a little bit different. He is explicitly saying that if the moon is in the last degrees of the sign, um, it indicates a low birth of the mother, right? It indicates some kind of affliction to the mother as a figure in the nativity, except for when she's in the final degree or degrees of Cancer and Libra. Those are the two exceptions he gives. The reason being, Cancer is the land or marriage of the gods, depending on which text you look at, what language. And because Libra, those final degrees are called that of increase.
mm-hmm.
So very, very interesting here. There's this idea of anaretic degrees before that was really even coined in that way,
Yeah.
it definitely akin to what you hear people talk about in a lot of modern astrology today.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah. And it could even connect perhaps to the idea in some definitions of the void of course moon, that
mhm,
after she's approaching the end of a sign and made her last aspect, there's some element of her slackness there. I don't totally emphasize that definition a lot, but sometimes you can see that, like, we always feel a shift. I mean, I don't know, maybe not always, but and maybe not all of us, but like feeling the shift of a lunar ingress can sometimes be really potent just in a moment or like in the day if you've ever had that experience. So yeah, I think it just makes sense that it's like, oof, when she's in 28, 29, something's risky, something's up in the air here, something's a little bit unnerving, perhaps.
mhm.
But also interesting that Cancer and Libra are exempt from this negativity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Libra, especially interesting too, especially with the Via Combusta and
Mm. Her about to be in Scorpio. Like,
yeah. But maybe that's like part of that saving grace. Like this is like you're about to go into your fall. So this is
hmm
your last chance.
yeah.
Yeah.
For
Also,
what it's worth, oh yeah.
go ahead. I was
I was
gonna.
just gonna say, for what it's worth, it's interesting that she would be in the bounds of Mars in Libra and Saturn in Cancer, which is where the malefics are both in their exile,
Hmm,
which is the only case, I think. Otherwise, you have Mars in, oh, Mars is in Taurus in the last bounds there.
yeah.
But either way, it's interesting.
Yeah, yeah. There's something notable to be
Yeah.
said there.
There's still something with the malefics, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe they're not as weak or strong malefically in their detriment
And
bounds or exile bounds.
right, right. And just more generally, I mean, Libra is ruled by her benefic sektmate. She's
And
very,
Cancer's her sign.
right, right. And Taurus, like maybe one could see something similarly, It's not
Hmm.
said in this text, but I think that's a possibility. It's a logical deduction that could be kind of broadened here.
Yeah.
I wanted to just, before we move on to the fourth consideration,
Hmm.
we're not even done with the third consideration, but backtracking a little bit to something earlier in this paragraph, um, look to the separations of the moon to signify those things which pertain to the body, the elder brothers, the conjunctions, business activities, and financial circumstances. So he's saying the moon's last aspect refers to the body, right? What she's separating from refers to the body. What she's going into refers to what you do with your life, right? Your business, your finances, um, sustainability in a way. And then the idea of kin, which precedes you, right? Look to the older brothers, older sisters. I'm going to add that in there. Yeah, to see with the moon's aspects. Yeah. And the moon's last and next aspect are also super, super important. And that's outlined in this third consideration as well.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Then if she's void, again, the nodes, and then we kind of get off of the moon after that. Because then we
Yeah,
get the besieging of the luminaries and the ascendant. So that's interesting because we always talk about besiegement for the planets, but not for angles. But that's relevant here. Um, by benefic signifies good, but by malefics evil. They're 12 parts, the same things. So I'm pretty sure, saying the 12 parts of the benefics and malefics, giving their benefits and poisons to wherever they're landing.
right.
Um,
And while the angles cannot technically cast rays, they cannot cast light, they sure as hell can collect the rays that planets cast into a
mm,
degree of a sign. Yeah,
yep. Um, this is interesting because he's saying if the falling on the ecliptical nodes, now he's saying that right after he's talking about their 12 parts. In my mind, that has to be referring to the 12th part of something falling onto the nodal axis. Um, and he's saying it just makes illnesses for the child and the mother. And at that point, I believe there is some of the Greek text.
yeah, yeah. I'm sorry. I will try
But
and be more mindful of that. What I was saying about Libra and Cancer and anaretic degrees recently, that comes from the Greek text. This is not the
yeah,
Latin interpolation. Um,
yeah. But real quick about that, because basically after that, um, we get names for those regions that are pure. Um, so the last degrees of Libra are called increase, and the last degrees of Cancer are called land of the gods. Now, the Latin version has marriage of the gods, but this is very interesting to me because there's this amazing text called the Liber Hermetis, which is probably very old and probably has a lot of material from the ancient Egyptians. Um, but it's only extant in Latin, and it gives names for each of the bounds, and it gives like a poetic name for all the regions of the zodiac. And those are the names that are in the later Liber Hermetis. But what's so interesting is that the Greek picks up in that area. So it actually is from a Greek source, those same poetic names that are preserved in Liber Hermetis that are only in Latin. This is a source for their um extant extancy in Greek, which is very curious because we do not have the Liber Hermetis with all those beautiful poetic descriptions of the bounds and fixed stars and all that in Greek at all. So that's just very important in my mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Notable. Very notable.
Yeah.
For sure. Picking back up with the Latin,
Yep.
so let's move into death a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Investigate the ruler
Just
of
moves into death a little bit.
the
Yeah.
T. Um, so yeah, investigate the ruler of the triplicity and the IMC, so the IC, because the former signifies the kind of death, the latter sicknesses. So I think
Hmm.
this is saying look to the it was a little ambiguous. I couldn't quite tell whether he was saying look to the primary trip lord for the kind of death, the secondary for sicknesses, whether he was saying look to the general, like the domicile ruler of the IC for the kind of death, whereas the triplicity ruler for sicknesses. It's a little bit unclear there.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah.
I personally think it makes more sense to look to the primary and secondary triplicity lord, but that's my opinion. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
Are you ready
I
to move on?
am. Yeah, I'm actually just pulling up the CCAG real quick because I have it here. Um, so it's page 118. I just want to see what he's writing there. If you want to actually go ahead, I'll look at this for a moment and then resume what he's saying here because I want to know.
Okay, gotcha. All right, so quick recap of the third consideration. Look at everything in the mother of the moon. Um, yeah, literally look at every single consideration, but some key ones, look to last and next aspects, every kind of dignity relating to her, every kind of ruler relating to her. Um, and keep in mind that the final degrees of Cancer and Libra are a little bit sacred compared to the final degrees of every other sign. And then look to the IC for means of death and sickness. Now, the fourth
Oh,
examination
I'm
of
sorry, but
the
I just read the Greek and I understand what it's saying, and Holden doesn't have it translated right. I'm gonna share my screen really quickly. It says,
oh,
Zete decaitus trigonicus despotas to hypogeo country. He's saying, look at the triplicity rulers of the IC. Hogar prutos semine tentu thanatou. So the first triplicity ruler shows the Thanatu Hoyoteta. It's like the manner, yeah, the manner that death is put into action. Hododeuteros Tosinos, and the second, the sickness. So it's saying the first triplicity ruler of the IC is the kind of death. The second triplicity ruler of the IC is the sicknesses, which is so cool because we have a Greek source for triple rulers of the houses, which is a concept that goes to up until here. We just have medieval authors to talk about that, but that's no. Wow, that's pretty cool. All right, there we go.
yeah,
And Holden,
yeah,
that makes me really. I know I've this chapter has so many little things like that, and I've wanted to go and look at them because I don't know. Now I gotta like go way deeper into that, but maybe we'll have an update on some things here after another look. But anyway, there we have it, folks.
revising translations of Rhetorius. Like,
Yeah. It's very
yeah,
clear though there. I don't know why he translated it like that. It literally he literally could have switched and for of the ruler of the triplicity of the IMC. So that could have been a very small editing mistake in his own part, but in my mind the Greek was very clear. So I feel like it was maybe a small mistake in the how we put it in English. But anyway, we can move ahead.
all right. Thank you for doing that. I appreciate that clarification. Do we have any comments in the chat before we move on to four?
Yeah, people are excited. Anaya says hi. Um, Jared says, I feel like the end of Taurus is dangerous from a fixed star perspective, though.
Hmm.
I mean, I would agree now for our tropical zodiac, but that might not have been a consideration back for where those like Algol and that is now. So perhaps. Um, People said remember to like the stream. Thank you very much.
Thank you guys. You're reminding us to promo ourselves and we
I know.
forget. Like,
Yeah. Um, okay. Cool. So yeah, so we're on the fourth examination. I rudely interrupted you abruptly. Where were we exactly?
all good. I hadn't even really opened it up.
Okay.
In the fourth examination, moving on to number 4, it is necessary to examine the new moons, and full moons, in which houses they are, and to which stars they join themselves after the new or full moon. Also, look at which ones rise before the lights and which after. Let's pause there for just a minute. So, again, coming back to this idea of progressions that we touched on earlier, notice that new moons, full moons, this is plural. It's the idea, it's not just the syzygy here that he's talking about, or the prenatal sys, I should say. Um, and then look at which stars they join themselves after the new or full moon. So, what is the next aspect? Do you, it's notable if the moon is still under the sun's beams when it is meant to collect the next ray of a planet. Um, Note the difference between a ray that's cast under the sunbeams that the moon is meant to connect with and the moon's connection with a planet after it has already emerged from under these
Mhm.
beams. So keep that in mind. And similarly with the full moon, tying this back to an earlier concept of being bound to the sun, the binding to the sun, with her
Hmm.
relationship to those aspects,
Mhm.
that has some relevance here. Uh, yeah. Did you? Oh, also look at which ones rise before the lights and which after. So
Mhm.
we're talking about
Little thing
calliope
to
movement.
Dorofor.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
but both.
But
We were both
yeah,
on it there. Yeah.
yeah. You took the word out of my
It's the
mouth.
same thing. It's the same thing,
Uh,
really. The stars that
right.
are
It's
near the lights. Although
all.
except for the Dorforia would also include aspects. So you were, I would say, more correct with thinking, yeah, I mean, rising before and after, that's all about like right now, Saturn's about to disappear. Um, we're not going to see him in a couple weeks for about a month. So, like, yeah, that's important right now. Like he's setting very close to the sun.
Mhm,
Um, but yeah, and he's saying some things about malefics dominating the aspects towards the luminaries, indicative of dangers and maybe violent death. Um, oh, but if the benefics are connecting with the planets, either we can assume maybe it's the moon that aspects a benefic after she comes out of the beams. Maybe it's a benefic that's rising or setting with the sun or moon in Dorifori. He says then the circumstances and luck of the parents will be good, which we can infer from the luminaries naturally signifying the father and mother, perhaps, probably. But if they're malefics and out of sect, again, doing something with those luminaries, then we consider that the parents are foreigners of another race or lowborn or humble. So he basically says that specifically about the Dorifores and the phasal appearances and aspects for the benefics and malefics, but then he qualifies it further that any ray of malefics, bisextile or square, are the ones that he explicitly says can indicate dangers and violent death when they come to the sun or moon. So even a malefic sextile, which is interesting in my mind. I mean, to me, I wouldn't jump right there if we weren't seeing a lot of
right.
other
I
stuff.
would
But
think that opposition would take the place of sextile in this segment, but I guess not.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Now he goes
Um,
into the prenatal syzygy.
mhm.
Look also at the rulers of the new or full moon. I mean, this could be more broadly about progressions, but there's no plurality here. So look also at the rulers of the triplicity of the new or full moon, how they are situated, and by whom they are beheld, what phase they have, if they're not averted from the new moon, or oh, now it goes back into plural. Actually, So, okay, interesting, interesting. So, um, first he says, look at the rulers of the new or full moon. But then by the time that he gets to the end of the sentence, he's using plural for moon again. So this could be progressions or it could be just the prenatal syzygy. It makes sense to apply it to both, if you ask me. Uh,
Mm,
yeah. So, yep. Once again, just going back to phase, dignity, all sorts of things. What we've been talking about, triplicity, all of that, and how it relates to these figures.
yeah.
Um,
And I know I'm like scanning. Do we
yeah,
want to talk about
he
that?
continues to talk about, um, oh, one thing I meant to ask you about this before we started filming. If the
Mm,
ruler of the radical place of the moon is found being averted from her, and the ruler of the ascendant is averted from it, he goes on
mm,
to say some concerning things about human beings. But I he's referring to the ruler of the natal moon's position is found
hmm.
being averted from the moon, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Which I think is just like extra emphasized because he's specifically saying like in the sentence right before that about the new moon and the full moon. But yeah, he's saying if the Lord of the Moon in the natal chart doesn't see the moon and the ruler of the ascendant is averted from the ascendant, then you get people with severe physical deformities.
Mhm.
Um, can't say I can attest to that at all
Yeah.
for
Same.
or against, but yeah, that's what he says. Um,
Are you ready for consideration five?
yeah.
Cool. Kick us off.
Welcome to Lot World. Well, guys, we're gonna talk all about the lots now.
Yeah, we've got a
Um,
lot to talk about.
yeah, we do.
Actually, seven.
Um, yeah, yep. So he starts off saying, in the fifth consideration, it's necessary to examine the lot of fortune and of the diamond, and of the basis and the exaltation of the nativity, and their phases and house positions. So we have two new lots that we haven't talked about here. And I don't know, have we talked about basis and exaltation at all?
I think we did. Yeah, we talked about the seven hermetic lots.
Oh, yeah. He talks about them in his chapter on the lots. No, he totally does.
Yeah, I want to say
Um,
it's like only a couple. Yeah, like
like a
chapter
page or two before, even
47.
maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, he gives fortune, daemon, nemesis, eros, victory, necessity, courage.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
Oh, but not exaltation. He does give basis. I don't see exaltation here, though.
Yeah,
Am I missing it?
yeah, I don't see exaltation either. I didn't highlight it. He also gives a couple other lots that we'll touch on here soon that he doesn't
Hmm.
reference in that chapter. So we're incorporating some new calculations into
Yeah.
fifth consideration, which are the lots of the nativity.
Yeah. Um, so, yeah, he's saying, look at their phases, which is interesting because in my mind, if you're talking about phase in reference to a lot, to me, that's saying, look at the phase position of the two planets relative to each other that are constructing the lot. Like the phaseos, like I'm just looking at it here, the phases of them. So yeah, he's saying in my mind that means yeah, like if you're looking at a Mars Saturn lot, what's the Mars Saturn phase? So it's kind of just like maybe he's just saying plot it right or
Yeah, I think there's also something worth being said here, though, because he talks about the lot of fortune or its ruler being under the sunbeams.
mm,
I know he's mentioned that. So, I mean, the idea of a lot being combust or under the beams is fascinating.
yeah. Where does he say that?
I don't think I saw it in this chapter. I think that was something we talked about
Yeah, I know definitely he brings it up for the rulers. But anyway, um,
while
okay,
you're
where
talking.
did we go? Oops. Yeah, so he says, if if they are averted from the ascendant, but angular with respect to fortune and with benefics, they signify fine things for the luck, if indeed they're under the beams.
Oh.
Ah, okay. So this line's interesting because if he's referring to they here, he's got to be talking about the lots. Um, in my mind, he's saying their phases, their house positions, then if they happen to be averted from the ascendant. But here's the sentence you might have been thinking of where he says, and they do indicate luck if they are indeed under the sunbeams, which is also maybe a little anti your expectation, because like why would a lot being under the beams of the sun make it extra lucky? Um, so I'm looking at that right now. Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at. I love how I said that this page, I was like, I feel like this page doesn't have like too much meat in it. And like we're sitting here talking about like the
I know
first
we're like
minutes.
really I know you're like, let's not talk about that one. I
Yeah.
mean,
Um, yeah. But yeah, there's some ambiguity here where he's talking about the lots and their position in respect to the sun. Obviously, planetary phase is going to really, really impact lot calculations, especially when
hmm,
spirit or daimon are involved and a planet's relationship to the sun. Yeah, absolutely. But
hmm.
here we're looking at the lot and its relationship to the sun, it seems. So definitely makes you scratch your head. Um, yeah. Are you looking at the Greek?
Oh, yeah, I don't this also doesn't make sense what Holden's saying here. I don't know how he would have pulled that from what's written.
Whoa.
It says, so yeah, it says, or upon the angles of the lot of fortune with the benefics, for that indicates good things to the fate. A per ex algoi to cosin. It's just saying like because they're I don't know. Ex hold on. Hold on. We're doing a quick detour. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
This is
I'm gonna continue reading about the lot of exaltation while
okay.
Cam
Okay. Yeah.
works on that.
Stella, you just just yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
I
Yeah.
have
Yeah. So, but if
oh,
also the ruler of the exaltation of the nativity is afflicted, it makes destruction, but if with the lot of fortune, well situated, beheld by benefics, its ruler of the lot, yeah, the translation is definitely choppy here.
I know.
I
It's just like
don't
as
even
an
know Greek.
astrologer reading the
Um, yeah, I don't even know Greek, and I don't. That was part of my disdain with these pages, because I was like, um, weird.
yeah, we'll come back to this paragraph because I'm seeing some other things ahead. So if you want to keep going to the yeah, just feel free to
Okay, so he says, plainly, either happiness or dejection must become manifest in accordance with the nature of the sign and the house position in which the lot of fortune and its ruler chances to be. So, where is the lot of fortune? Where is its ruler? Those two things will tell you happiness or dejection in life. Yeah. He also talks about malefics in their relationship to the houses from Fortune. Um, yeah, and it mentions that if the malefics are 12th or 6th and the light of the sect is found in its own house, triplicity, or exaltation. It will make acquisitions from violence, robbery, or wrongdoing. So you profit from immoral activities. And what is this kind of tying into here? The idea, and did you want to share your comment about hand and lot of fortune and life that we talked about earlier?
Mm, wait, sorry, about what?
Okay, so
Robert Hand?
was it not hand that you told me? I'm trying not to like take
Yes.
it out of your mouth
No,
and
yeah,
spit it in
Robert Schmidt
your mouth.
said like your fortune houses manifest over time. And he's
Schmidt.
saying here, yeah, no, all good. I couldn't remember. The so Schmidt says your fortune houses like manifest as you get older. And he's specifically saying here, if something's in a bad house to your ascendant, it's like unsuccessful at first. But if it's in a good fortune house, that thing becomes profitable or successful for you later in life. So I don't know if
Right.
Schmidt was referencing this here, but that's very clear here.
So, yeah, and there's this idea that the ascendant is, what there's this foundational element to it. But the lot of fortune is almost like what you make with what you have, right? The lot of fortune shows the direction that you take your life within the context of a nativity and how you sustain yourself, right, as you age. And it's interesting that Schmidt makes that distinction about the lot of fortune,
Hmm.
the houses from fortune, taking on more prominence into adulthood because fortune is not just your body, but how you keep yourself alive. And I think that's really relevant here, especially with the idea of profiting from violence. Yeah. I um
Um, can I comment on the earlier thing?
yes.
So as I interpret this sentence, there's I think what he I don't know. So the word in question here is exalgoi, which looks like it's related to algos, which is like the brightness of the beams of the sun. But exalgos as an adjective means like brilliant and shining. So he's saying for when these lots, but also I wonder if he's maybe supposed to be referencing the rulers of the lots. Um, yeah, for yeah, when they are upon the angles of the lot of fortune with the benefics, they indicate good to the fate of the nativity, for they make shining fates. That's what it says.
Hmm.
So nothing to do with
This
um
means
under the beams of the sun. That's
wow.
clarified.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, so yeah, thank you for clarifying that.
yeah.
Um, yeah. So not to do with the sunbeams, all about having brilliant luck,
Hmm.
radiant luck, radiant fortune.
Yes.
Um, Picking back up 37, the last chapter. I mean
Ooh,
paragraph.
are we on the top or bottom paragraph?
I was going to go into the bottom paragraph, but if you had to, if you want to talk about something else between there, feel free.
Um, I think from what I just remember hearing you say, it's all pretty general here. Things about being in diverted houses and um yeah, bad houses making not good things. We know that. Um, but the next paragraph is one of my most favorites
Yeah.
of this whole
Okay, you
chapter.
can go ahead and take it away. Go ahead.
Okay. So he says, and if most of the configurations and their rulers are found in order as to nature and arrangement, the things of life and honor will be long lasting. But the long duration of good fortune or bad fortune, or alteration of fortune, from the bonding of the progressions which occur from all the stars and the lot of fortune and of the daemon. Okay, so he's saying here these configurations they promise these things, you know, if most of these configurations are good, then that good fortune is good and long lasting. But if not, the long durations of good and bad fortune come from the bonding of the progressions. Now to understand exactly what he's saying here, um, we can assume a few things. Usually, when we see a Greek author talk about the bonding of the progressions, they're referring to circumambulations. So it's likely what he's indicating here is that we're circumambulating or using the ascensional times of these points he mentioned here, all the stars and the fortune and the daemon. But it's necessary too from the rising of the sign according to the Egyptians and from the cyclical period of each star. So he could essentially be saying that from the bonding of the movement, like or the bonding or like connections of the advancements of the stars, and just be referring to multiple timing systems generally, because the next sign says, I mean, the next sentence says, it's necessary as well from the rising of the sign according to the Egyptians, from the periods of the stars, which he says from the complete middle and least years, which we talked about in the planetary years episode, which felt like so long ago.
Yeah.
Um, and
Jeez.
according to the third and a half, and he means to say, and two-thirds of the rising times together, which is a technique that's super clear from Valens. So yeah, basically we can assume he's talking about here. Look at the planetary periods and ascensional times in their increments for the planets to time the events and the transitions in rulership of the stars. So how they switch the order and the sequence, of course. But also if he's using the word paradosis, which means the handing off, it might not be as clear if he's not using that. But if he is using that word, I think he's talking about perfections, where you have balance talks about that transmission. It's like you turn all the things as many years old, and Mars comes to Saturn, or Saturn comes to the moon, or Mercury transmits to Jupiter. So if he's saying the transitions in the rulership of the stars, um, yeah, in my mind, that could be about the transmissions in perfection. There's a footnote that's saying he's saying just track the handing over and sequence of it, which makes sense to advise that, but that's also kind of yeah, like that's kind of implicit. Um, but I'm trying to find it. If you want to read ahead on the next things, you can go
Okay.
ahead.
Um, all right. So let's bring it back to also we've been filming for an hour. Just a
Yeah,
time.
we're almost the
Um,
last six and seven are really short, so I think we're okay.
okay. Just I was just letting you
Yeah. Well, seven's kind of long, but yeah, we got this.
know. Okay. So now we're gonna bring it back to the lots, more specifically. Kind of digressed a little bit, but now we're coming back to those. So, similarly, the lots signify the first age of life, but their rulers signify the last. Very interesting. And the ruler of the basis is the foundation of fortune. So you have to look to the lot of basis to understand the foundation of your lot of fortune. He continues on when dividing the years of the native, cast the years not only from the ascendant, but also from the sun, moon, and lot of fortune. If he has a father and mother, the years cast from the lot of father and mother. Thus, look at the years of the parents. Examine lest in any manner the star having the most authority for the nativity. So this could be in reference to the master of the nativity, or just more broadly, any star that has the most dignity, strength within the chart, and what exactly that star is doing, what it's capable of, how that influences the life. Uh, and with all of the aspects, look at the influences of the terms, the judgments of the houses, and the mutual configurations of the stars and the faces of the decans, along with their paronatolanta and the forms of the circle of the 12 animal figures. So now, stepping away from the lots again, he's saying, look at all of the aspects. to these places. Excuse me. And their terms, the houses. Um, I think it's interesting mutual configurations. He's incorporating mutual reception, right? Or mutual application, even. Um, yeah. And then the positions of the stars and the faces of the decans. Very interesting here. So, like, first of all, the faces of the decans. That phrasing there, maybe I should not get lost in the weeds because, as y'all have seen, there's some translation bumps in the road here. But I don't know, the faces of the decans is a really interesting phrasing, kind of personifying these segments of the zodiac in a different way. What does it mean to have the faces and the decans, or the decans, right? Or the faces of the decans? Yeah, or the spirits associated with them.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that's it
yeah,
because Firmicus talks about this like you have the decans on their own, which you can talk about, but there are the bright degrees that contain the divine spirit that is withheld in that decan. And
and
for
he
anyone
mentions
interested
stars
in,
right there too.
hmm?
I'm sorry, he mentions the stars like right there too, right before it. The stars
Yeah,
and the faces of the decans.
yeah, exactly, which have to do with those bright degrees within each decan, which is going to say that these are sidereal because there are specific degrees on the sidereal images where the decanic powers reside. And that is the crux of the power of those decanic spirits. And for anyone interested to learn more about that, I'm doing a class on it next Sunday night, which you can find through my website if you want to learn more about the decans in ancient Egypt and its transmission to the Greek astrologers. But yeah, that's going to be really cool. I do have a quick note on the timing technique passage. And again, I'm kicking myself because I wish I just read this earlier because it's really clear. I don't know if Holden wasn't a practicing astrologer. I know he was a really famous academic and he translated so much stuff. But part of me is wondering that because I don't know, I'm just looking at it and to me I'm like, it's much clearer there. And then it became like much more kind of garbled in his words.
I
But
also
anyway, yeah,
I also want to mention too, he very well may have been a practicing astrologer, but just not have had the same kind of resource and access to the tradition in the way that we have. Um, Not
yeah,
saying that he was, but that can also factor into this as well.
yeah.
But, proceed. I'm sorry.
All good. So he is specifically saying in the first sentence, the durations of the good and bad times you find from the circumambulations and conjunctions coming from all of the stars and the lot of fortune and diamond. That's what that's saying. So he's saying you circumambulate those points to the aspects and conjunctions of the planets. Then
How
he's
much
saying,
clearer is that
yeah.
in
Then
the way
he's
that
saying, look at the ascensional times of the signs in their increments and the planetary periods of the planets in their increments. That's it.
Hmm.
So that's
Hmm.
really clear.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Um,
Finally, he says, regarding the lots, also examine the moon, lest she see the lot of the anaretic star, for this signifies a violent death. The lot of the anaretic star is taken from the ruler of the horoscope up to the moon, and the result is cast from the ascendant, but by night vice versa. So you're taking the degrees from the ruler of the first to the degree of your moon. If your moon is the ruler of your first, um, mm, maybe take from the ascendant itself, um,
mm,
like to calculate that and project that from the ascendant. And I think it's interesting the lot of the anaretic star because what were we saying about the moon and those final degrees of a sign and the use of anaretic degrees. I just think it's interesting. This is kind of coming up again. I mean, Anoretic here is referring more to death, right? Like, you agree with that?
I think so.
Or like the end of life, maybe? Because it says signifies a violent death.
Right. If the moon's aspecting the lot.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, yeah. If she's aspecting it, it's violent death. And then he says
I don't
it
know why.
is.
Why do you think that is? Like, I don't know.
I mean, I think because the moon's involved in the calculation, like you go from L1 to the moon. So I don't
I'm
know.
just,
That lot has always confused me. That lot has always confused me that that's the calculation for the anoreta, the anoretic lot.
yeah.
For
I
years I've
mean,
always just
there's,
wondered why that's the
right, like there's lots of affliction and illness
hmm
and turmoil, strife, retribution, but
hmm
but this I don't know. I don't know. It makes me scratch my head too. But that's
yeah.
the last thing he has to say about the fifth consideration,
hmm
before he moves on to the sixth. So
Yeah.
must be mentioned.
Um, for the sixth, it's a little well, okay. It's necessary to examine the ascending and descending node, in which houses and decans they are. Very interesting. He explicitly says the decans of the nodes because if you have this little old great book here, if you just make your little old way back to, wait, where is it? Appendix 3, page 207, judging an eclipse. The first thing that says, look at the eclipse that's being made, either of the sun or moon, see which sign it occurs, and look at the decan, indeed, in which face it falls. So there's a specific appendix about judging eclipses based off of the decan of the eclipse. And here we have the same comment about the nodes and the decans of the nodes. So to me, it's very interesting that, yeah, looking at the faces, the decanic powers, the segment of the image that's being obscured by the nodes or, destroyed by it somehow. Yeah, there's a specificity here that he's using that is remarkable.
Yeah, yeah,
I don't know.
yeah. Agreed. Remarkable is an excellent word, for this context, for certain. Um, he proceeds with the delineations about how the nodes manifest, benefic's good, malefic's evil, harm to the mother,
Mhm.
harm to the father. Um, yeah. And then with this sixth consideration, the Latin ends, the Latin concludes. I don't
Mhm.
think there's any more.
Well, the Latin was just a little bit or just that little bit of the sixth. There was like one, like basically from the it harms the on the bottom of 38. Yeah. So, yeah, the sixth is weird though, because it's kind of short and abrupt.
Mhm.
Um,
I feel like we're missing, definitely missing literature here, especially
yeah.
when we compare the length of the sixth one to the length of
The
all.
previous and the next one,
Yeah,
yeah, it's weird.
yeah. We're
Well, there
definitely,
isn't, yeah, I was just gonna say there is an ellipsis following the lest, so it says there
yeah,
the Latin fails. Um, but he thinks not much of the original was lost. Hmm, okay, hold on.
right.
Um,
Conjecture.
even yeah, I mean even in the CCAG, they're marking that yeah, it falls out in Greek at that point too, which means they put it in Latin and just probably didn't continue it. Um,
Real
yeah.
quick, sorry, is it too dark on my end?
No,
Okay.
it's a little dim, but it's fine.
Okay. Let me know if it starts to get too dark.
Okay. So, the seventh consideration, one of my favorites, maybe my next most favorite. Um, there's a lot of juicy stuff here. The final one, also interesting to note that we have seven altogether, right?
Mhm.
He says, examine the dodecatomories of the stars, especially the sun and moon and the ascendant, in which houses of the natal ascendant they are, by which stars they're beheld. For if their dodecatomories along with the ascendant happen to be in quadrupedal signs, say that the native will be a quadruped or a monster, especially when the lights are so placed, and also in particular the lot of fortune and its rulers. And many times this scheme makes charioteers and horse couriers and animal caretakers when the benefics are an aspect. So if you have things going into very four-legged animal signs like Leo, Taurus, um, my mind just stopped. Aries, Sagittarius, they're going to bring about more animal-like significations. Now, if the base of your nativity, if the scheme is already indicating problems with the vital force, yeah, maybe there's the problem with an extremity. But if you have support from benefics, your vitals are good, then it might just mean you love to work with horses. Maybe that's all it means. You're just a Sagittarian. Like, so yeah.
Yeah, and like in a modern context, this isn't quite as prominent, right? The idea of like working with animals in the same way. Like there's not very many charioteers out there.
Hmm.
However, we do have a lot of taxi drivers, Uber drivers, cab drivers.
Yep.
Um, and it is not an animal, but it has four legs, and
Yeah, charioteers, exactly.
yeah, a very similar visual manifestation of that.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Beautiful point.
thank you. Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Um, hmm.
So then he says, but if the moon is averted from its dispositor or opposed to its dispositor, signifies the same thing. Now think about that though. If it's saying the moon's opposed to its dispositor, that means its moon's dispositor is in its exile. So that's kind of what I'm looking at here, where if you're not seeing your ruler, or if you're seeing your ruler who's like dejected and far away, and you're the moon, and you're like, hey, I'm like the body and the vital force and stuff, like that's gonna be hard for me to work as best as I can. So that's what he's saying there, basically. And he says if the third day of the moon is in a quadrupedal sign and beheld by malefics, then it makes these same things. Um, and then there's another really specific configuration about the prenatal syzygy for the same thing. Now, the causative lot, the one from Saturn and Mars, as a result, cast from the ascendant, and by night, vice versa. So you always go from insect to the out of sect malefic for that lot. Um, for this lot beheld by the malefics is perilous and especially dangerous, making nativities destructive. It beholds the configuration of the signs according to the equal rising signs. For it's necessary that Virgo and Aries be considered to be in opposition, and Libra and Pisces, and the rest of the equal rising and homozone signs. Now, that's pretty interesting because up until here, we've been all hummy-drummy that these homozones and antitia relationships are like conjunctions. They blend their effects, and they're positive because they connect things that can't be seen. But here, in the case of this malefic lot witnessing a malefic, it's all of a sudden gonna make you a quadruped. So, little bizarre, but yeah. What are your thoughts?
I think it's fascinating that he first of all, he says Libra and Pisces and the rest of the equal rising and homozone signs. That could be a kind of direction where he's referring to Libra and Pisces as homozone in a way.
Hmm.
Um, but like based on dignity. But that might be a little bit of a reach. But I do think that's worth noting, especially with
Hmm.
dignity and the fact that Venus, no matter where she is, if she has dignity by domicile or exaltation, she cannot witness both of her domiciles. Um, so that is worth mentioning. And then he goes into homozone. So, and the rest of the equal rising and homozone signs. Um, I do think it's interesting. I mean, obviously, malefic lot, being in contact with malefics is going to increase its maleficence. I guess this is just one of those parts of the sky that is inherently negative, right? Like
Mhm.
if you have it with a benefic, it would probably hinder that benefic. I'm not sure how much that benefic would prevent these kinds of things. And I also really find the use of causative as a word here to be notable as well, rather than just injury or affliction, right?
Mhm.
Which are other ways that we've seen this lot referred to, the causative lot. Um, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just reading
Um,
this to see what else could he be saying here. Um, Atatas isodunamias, the same powers. Huh. Yeah. Um, yeah, he's saying that like Antisha, because he's giving two examples. He says Virgo and Aries and Libra and Pisces, which are Antisha. But then he says also the equal rising, which are contra Antisha and homozone signs. So he's listing all of the symmetrical sign relationships that in this case, he's just saying, yeah, in this case, they should be inspected as if in diameter by relationship. So, yeah, yep, that's it. So, that's that chapter or paragraph.
this lot is inherently oppositional, period,
Yeah.
right? You know, like no matter how you slice it, it's inherently oppositional.
Hmm.
Also, I'm losing light, so go ahead and kick us off with those
Okay.
tips.
So the next paragraph is very juicy. We hear him tell us it is necessary in each nativity to examine the influences of the decans as regards the stars and the Paranatolanta and the faces of the decans and the bright degree areas of the signs. For not, by reviewing thus all seven of these considerations, you will not go wrong on the fundamentals of the nativity. Woo! That's it. Although it's not it, because then there's this extra supplementary paragraph about eclipses and other things of fixed stars. And actually, there's an amazing thing about fixed stars below this. So it's not it, but then he's like starts to wish you well in your journey of doing astrology. Um, but he's saying here that we have to look at the decans in relation to the stars, as regards the stars. And then the Paranatolanta, which, as he's already said, it is those stars co-rising with each other, and the faces of the decans, which, in my mind, have probably has to do with the magical images associated with the stars, which are planetary in nature, because the planetary rulers of the signs are what are referred to as the prosopa or the faces. Each decan has the face of a planet or the image of a planet. So we have the stars of the decans, the Paranatolanta of points. He's not really specific. He just says, look at the Paranatolanta, which could mean about the stars co-rising with each decan, which could also be related to the stars that project with the decan. But that's projection by ecliptic versus projection by horizon. Those are two different things, and that's why he says it here. Um, and then the faces of the decan, which has to do with the ruler, and then the bright degree areas of the signs, which have to do with the 36 bright stars of the first and second magnitude that were given in 379, and that he gives in chapter 81 here. For by reviewing all seven of these considerations, you will not go wrong on the fundamentals of a nativity. And there you have it.
Um,
And
yeah,
then there is that one more paragraph with some extra, actually very, 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 very friggin' cool things
yeah,
in it.
yeah. This is quite the closing remark. This final
Mhm.
paragraph packs a punch for sure. This seventh consideration, I feel
Yeah.
the final section is really the meat of
Mhm.
kind of a lot. I mean, this whole thing has been quite meaty, but yeah. So they are also very, oh, whoop, I just jumped up in the middle of nowhere. Interesting that this is the first time that he is referring to the lot of the 11th place from Fortune. Examine also
Oh,
the influences of
is
the
it?
11th house of Fortuna and watch out for the triplicities of the eclipses. So he doesn't mention the 11th place from Fortune anywhere earlier um, within this chapter, it's chapter 54. Um, yeah. So we
I
have,
think he does mention it just once in the sixth consideration.
oh, does he?
He says the lots signify the first age, but their rulers the last. Fortuna, bodily ailments as well as acquisitions, especially the 11th house of it and its ruler.
Mm, mm.
Um, yeah, I think that's here.
Okay. Okay. My
Sixth?
bad. But
No, no,
there,
all good. I think it's interesting though that he brings it up again here. Um, this whole last little paragraph is a little interesting, especially that next line about the triplicities of the eclipses.
yeah, the triplicities of the eclipses. Um, there's a footnote here where he says, I think something's missing in the middle because the first and the last part of the sentence do not seem to explicitly like relate to each other, um, which is definitely a possibility. Um, yeah, but uh, yeah, this could be the triplicity rulers of the eclipses. This could be the nature of the triplicity which an eclipse falls within. This could also be, uh, no, that was all I had to say. It could be either of those things.
I'm looking
Yeah,
for this word, and then we're gonna see what he's saying right here. Because I smell sus. Fulato. Yeah.
okay.
Oh,
So they are also very effective. Oh, backtrack. That's the second time I have just jumped right into the middle of that same exact sentence. Um,
oh,
Examine also the degrees of the angles, for many times when the stars of the Nativity have fallen from the angles, the bright ones of the fixed stars are also found in the degrees of the angles, and they make the natives to be great and surpassing. So this is kind of a reference to having a bunch of cadent planets, right? If you have a bunch of natal planets that are still cadent, in dark houses retreating, fixed stars again can really, really counter that and can really ground this nativity in greatness still, despite the fact that the planets have fallen. And so we see that the celestial sphere of the fixed stars can outweigh that of the planets.
mm,
Um, and that ties into the highest sphere of divinity, right? The fixed stars, which really do not move, we move within them. Yeah. So yeah. And he even says it. For many
yeah.
do not
I love
know the
that line.
power and efficacy of the fixed stars. There's a little attitude in here. Like,
hmm
you look at this because a lot of people don't even know. Um,
He's so right, and like I get what he means because like those they just send this like little signal that just overwhelms the feeling of the entire chart when you see one right on an angle. And then it's like it's right there. It's like of course Trump has Regulus right on his ascendant. Like come on guys, like these people that get these bright powers like just obscene like just ah I'm sorry. I'm overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed, you guys. I'm sorry.
that's okay. Um, yeah. But these fixed stars are also very effective in the bondings of the progressions, especially if the star of the bondings runs towards the wind of the fixed star.
Primary direct your fixed stars, folks. That's what he's saying.
Hmm. Yeah.
I love it.
Direct planets, direct angles, two fixed stars. Um, yeah, do not neglect that celestial sphere. Um,
Hmm.
is really what he is like hounding on in this last
Hmm.
paragraph.
Yeah.
Similarly, the fixed stars are again effective if they happen to be in the same degrees with the planets according to the same wind.
Hmm.
Um,
And that's
and
an
this,
extra important little piece there. Like if
yeah,
you're directing, like for instance, anything directing to Regulus will have always some impact because not only Regulus is Regulus, but it's right on the ecliptic. But for things that are much more northern and southern, like Sirius or Algol, that are like have a lot more degrees away from the ecliptic, he's saying when a planet is north or south of the ecliptic, its primary directions are going to be louder and more resonant to those fixed stars that share either the northern latitude above the ecliptic or southern latitude beneath it. So, very practical extra little tip he gives there as the final line of the seven examinations of the horoscope.
yeah. And also like it's interesting that he really saves this. Like, yes, he addresses fixed stars. Yes, he dances around them throughout these first six considerations. But with this seventh one here, it's like he has reached the highest sphere himself, right? He has moved up, and that is his conclusion on the um, systematic delineation of a nativity.
Mhm.
Um, yeah,
He literally is like, do all seven of these things and then you'll be fine. But then he decided, you know what? Primary director fixed stars, though. Okay.
yeah,
Like there's I think it's so golden that that is like the last thing that he just tacks on so casually. Uh Now, as for this triplicities of the eclipses line, I'm having trouble finding a translation in the lexicon for this word fulato. Now, Holden is translating that as like watch out for or observe or look at. But it's saying literally ta trigona ton ekleiptikon, which is literally something with the trigonal places or the trigons of the eclipsing places. The trines of the nodes, the trines of the eclipses, the triplicity of the eclipse, the element of the nodes, the element of the like there's so many different ways here that can be understood and none of them really make sense with what he's talking about because he talks about a lot of fortune, and then he goes into fixed stars, and then right in between we just get that kind of random line on the trines of the nodes basically. So peculiar.
yeah. If anybody has any experience with that, like I would be, or has experimented with that, like I would be really interested to hear what what you have to say about that.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, because typically, like when we're talking about the nodes, like even a trine aspect is not going to be super important, Like you look at the bendings of the nodes, and you look at conjunctions to them. Uh,
Mhm.
but but yeah, there's definitely something here. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
So, so where does it leave us?
yeah. Do we have any comments in the chat?
Um, yeah, people have just been saying good things. It's yeah,
Okay.
that's it.
Oh, okay.
No
Okay.
immediate questions or things.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. Those are the seven examinations, and I'm actually a little bit like scratching my head right now because I'm probably gonna spend the next chunk of time going through what everything that doesn't totally click, and yeah, maybe we'll have more discussion about that. Um, This is our last chapter where we're directly reading from the book. But we do have intention to do one more episode on Camus' chart with all of this juicy stuff we looked at. So maybe we'll come back at you with some more thoughts and ideas on this stuff. But, as a whole, maybe we can just summarize quickly each of the seven things and what he talked about and then wrap it up.
Yeah, yeah. I know we talked a little bit about diving into Laszlo, Laszlo's translation of this similar passage that has shown up.
Hmm.
This has been a very long episode, so we're gonna save that for Camus,
Hmm.
and our upcoming episode, and we'll kind of reiterate briefly what we encountered here. It's not gonna be another close reading. Um, yeah, yeah. So, first and foremost, um, for that first consideration, some
Hmm.
really key points are diurnal motion, right? Where you are within your daily movement, the turning of the chart. That ties in directly to dorophoria as well. Dorophorias of the lights, Then we want to see the relationship between the lights and each other and the lights and the ascendant. Triplicity rulers of the sect ascendant, their rulers. Additionally, the triplicity rulers of the prenatal syzygy, and a lot of fortune, a lot of spirit, and the 12 parts of the planets. Those are the
Yeah.
key points for the first one.
Yeah. Yeah. So look at your helegicals, look at all of their essential rulers and their 12 parts. Okay. And then the Dorophores of the lights. So basically, sect, all of the sect things, quadrants and hemispheres and sign polarities and all that. And then vitals, and then rulership, rulership of the important places and their 12 parts. And that should tell you whether the birth is good or bad. Because that was the first line is he says the first thing you do is examine the good and bad births. And then he goes off in the first examination to tell you how. Second is basically again the rulers of the controller and the ascendant in the midheaven, just with the add statement that if they're under the beams, that's not good. So nothing new here. And
Mhm.
then he just says bright fixed stars with the angles and planets, and then the Lord of the Moon being away from her, or the Lord of the Ascendant being away from the Ascendant is bad. Which again, we could really put those conjunct like imagine putting them up in the first consideration. Um, so ruler second consideration, the only new thing is look at fixed stars.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Third
Um,
consideration, dive into the moon.
yeah, all of the lunar things.
Yeah,
Um,
really, really sit on her, um, like sit with her, like
mhm,
simmer on that moon and her positions. Um,
mhm,
we also get a little bit of discussion about death here,
mhm.
um, and the means.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's that third consideration.
Yeah.
Um, the
Oh, I don't
fourth.
know if we emphasized this, but I'll just one thing I want to say is that if you're born with a void of course moon, he says it just determines errors and disturbances in life.
Hmm.
So I think that's just an interesting point. I don't know.
Hmm. Hmm.
I mean, it's an unfortunate point, but we don't get a lot of definitions for that besides maternus.
Hmm.
So yeah. Um, yeah, and then besieging of the angles was interesting, and um, the aspects of the planets in their 12th parts where they land, and when the 12th parts land with the nodes, bad for the mom and the child health, and then last degrees of the sign are bad for the mother.
The fourth
And then yeah.
examination is all about progressions, really. It's really oriented to looking to the moon and how she changes throughout time, um, touching on the idea of violent death.
Hmm. Yep. So new and full moons, phases, aspects of the moon when she's near those phases, like who she meets after the full moon, who she meets after the new moon.
Mhm.
Um, which again, like,
First,
and when we,
look at the, oh, sorry, I was just going to say, first look at the moon in the Nativity, then
mhm,
do these things for the moon as she progresses through the life of the native, as she
right. So
changes
like,
over
like with that third examination, we can get a bunch of information from that. But like, when someone's reaching, for instance, their secondary progressed new or full moon, which is happening in those vital days before and after the birth, if it's, happening like the next full moon, and that's why, things are plural, right? So like you can talk about all of those things when someone's having they're 50 years old and they're having that full moon. You can talk about the fixed stars she's with and the aspects she's making and her latitude and her speed there, all of those things. If it's an eclipse and she's on a node, right? Like all of those things play into effect over time. Um, the third and seventh and 40th days, of course, as well. And then yeah, the Time Lords. So circumambulations, ascensional times, just flat and easy for activating places, and periods, planetary periods, activating things, and all of those things in their increments and in combinations and transitions in their rulership. Um, I want to look at
time.
that line real quick. Yeah.
And the lots in the Nativity, did we move on to
Mm.
five? I'm assuming we moved on to five. You were taking that from five, right? Not four.
Oh God. Did I just yeah, I'm sorry guys. I skipped over a bunch of five.
You're good. You're good.
Yeah.
Um, I
Five
mean, that's
begins with the
that,
lots.
yeah. Five is the lots and circumambulations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. As well as the faces of the decans is important here.
Mm.
That's kind of where we see this really being emphasized again. Um, yeah. Um, and then can I move on to the sixth?
Yeah.
In the sixth consideration, we're looking to the nodes, right? What the nodes are doing, how their faces, I guess their triplicities, that comes up in the seventh consideration, but I'm going to liken that back here. Um, know where they, how they interact with the luminaries and their 12 parts. I do think it's notable that he he also incorporates the planets aside from the luminaries in this approach. He's not just saying look to the luminaries in the nodes. He's saying Saturn, Mars, benefics, what they do and their relationship to the nodes as increase and decrease. Yeah, but also keep in mind that the nodes are unstable. Like I feel like that's something that he's not really like, yes, he's saying death and treachery, especially if the luminaries are connected with the nodes, but there's a destabilizing element to them, even if they do increase beneficence. Yeah. So do you want me to hold off for just a moment?
Mm, okay. Yeah. Basically, with that line on the line right after the ascensions and periods, he says, um, he's telling you to look at the perfection transmissions each year. He's saying the paradosis and the paralepsis. That word's interesting because paradosis and paralepsis, it's like, yeah, there's the basically just the transmission through the turning of the stars. Um, and that word though can also be like an omission, but I don't think that's what he's saying here. So yeah, he's talking about annual perfections after that, I think. At the very least, he's saying analyze the sequence of the chronocrators
Hmm.
for the lifetime.
Right.
But anyway, back to the fifth
Seven.
or sixth, sixth, oh, seventh. Sorry.
You're good. Unless you had more things to say about the nodes in the sixth. I mentioned
Um,
benefics. witnessing
I
faces.
mean,
I think we're good to wrap up with the seven.
yeah. Yeah. Um, things with the anaretic lot. Yep. Yeah, I know. And then the weird thing about the causative lot, and then the decans, the fixed stars, the parental onto the primary directions, the fixed stars, and then you got it. You got it. So
So the seventh consideration is where we go back to that with the fixed stars and really emphasize their role in the nativity. Yeah,
I thought you said we were on the seventh.
but I thought you just went back to the lots of.
No, no, that is the seventh, the causative lot, and then the parental onto and fixed stars, and
Oh,
then the primary
oh, oh,
directions.
that's my bad. That's my bad. Yeah.
It's okay. But see that this is how you see you guys. A lot of the stuff is similar and sort of repetitive-ish.
Yeah,
So
it's disorganized. It's disjunct with itself.
it's disjunct with his ruler.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, this is just coming down to the fact that we need a revised translation of this Greek as a first step. Um, and then step two is write a new one, a better one. So that's all of our job and everyone that's listening. And now we know all the things. We know
So it's,
literally so much now.
yeah, yeah.
The most
So,
important thing here is, or well, okay, I was just gonna say quickly, it's like we can analyze, and look at all of that shit. But when you only have 60 minutes, 10 minutes with someone to talk, what are you gonna say?
right. And
This
what,
is the most important part of our job after knowing and learning all of this.
right. And not just what are you going to choose to say, but what are they willing and able to hear from you?
Hmm.
Why, what, pick and choose from these things as you go into consults. I implore you to do step by step of these for your nativity, should you be inclined. But this is not it's not like we have caliphates and emperors and aristocrats who, I mean, some people do, I'm sure, have them as their clients, who expect this kind of thing. But it's not like we have emperors conjuring a court of astrologers with his son's birth, saying, "You have a week to give me his fortune." And that's not the reality for a lot of consulting astrologers. Um, so yeah, pick and choose from this. This has been a really, really good series. Great fun to dive into. Good old
Hmm.
Rhetori. Love you,
Yeah.
ready.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, we do have the Heroi translation from Laszlo coming up with
Yeah.
our chat about Camus. We're going to address a lot of what we see in this book and in that Heroi translation.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say, in my mind, that version represents the confused person that wanted to just make sense of all of these confusing seven chapters and just put it into a much shorter, yet still concise treatment. Because it says
Exactly.
almost maybe 75 to 80%, maybe 60 to 70% of what we all just read through in maybe a quarter of this.
It's,
So
yeah, a fraction of the length with
mhm,
quite well-rounded delineation techniques.
yeah,
Yeah, and a lot of the redundancy that shows up here in this text is not within Laszlo's translation of
yeah,
Rhetorius
yeah,
and the compendium.
yeah. So
All right.
with that, I think we'll revisit some of our questions and hopefully have better answers next time. So this isn't our last ending, even though we've sort of capped it off like that, we're gonna sprinkle on those primary directions with fixed stars, just like he did the next time we come back at you. Not literally with that, but with our real closing thoughts and ideas and reflections. And we can let this sink in and absorb it and ruminate. And you guys can too. Please, if you have any questions now, we'll shout things out before we sign off. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you to everyone that is still here on the stream. We're
Yeah.
almost at 2 hours. Um, so yeah. Um, Favorite technique he listed. What is it?
What?
10
My,
seconds.
oh my gosh. Well, you put me on the spot.
I
Well,
did.
I don't know. I mean like I've definitely been interested in delving more into the fixed stars, you know. Like you've mentioned this, we've talked about this previously. It is something that seems like it's a hard sphere to kind of pierce into and really absolve into your practice. And your recent dedication to that and his emphasis on this has struck me and it has motivated me to pursue further study of that topic. Yeah, yeah. So it's my favorite just because it's something exciting and new to learn about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're thinking alike because for me, yeah, it's definitely the last line, which you can tell from my hype that I've already emitted about that. But that's what I do. Like when I meet with people for consults, like that's what I'm doing. That's the core of my technique is looking at the horoscope, stars on the horizon, stars on the meridian, rotate it, find parens where planets and stars are angular together, and direct it to see when that hits in their life. Direct and converse. So you get double the amount of time to look at. And it is so powerful. It's the most powerful thing I've ever done in astrology, and I love it. So I'm definitely a champion for this final technique.
Nice. Nice.
But besides
I
that,
will,
because it's maybe
oh,
expected, or
I
mm,
was gonna say, I will say also, like Dorophoria, like that
mm,
was so fun to really
yeah,
dive into and to
yeah,
piece that together. That was a really great episode that I
mm,
really enjoyed, and consulting with Demetra's text and other authors who have touched on similar things. Because
mm-hmm,
Rhetorius gives us a bit more wiggle room
mm-hmm,
than a lot of
yeah,
others do. And that clicked with something in me,
mm-hmm.
for
And that
sure.
lines up with what he said first, too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in
Yeah.
this episode, I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Did you have another one?
Yeah, I just love how he talks about lots. I think he puts a lot of good emphasis on them, especially he doesn't bring up the planetary lots here, which I did think was peculiar. They're nowhere to be found in the examination. I do think in the other version, it does say the lots of the planets,
Yeah.
but in this version, it doesn't. So that's interesting considering what, like 3 pages ago, you were just telling us about how important the lot of retribution is.
Right.
But um, nevertheless, I still think they are. But I do like just certain things he emphasizes with like yeah things being angular to the lot of fortune, it sets up a whole new ascendant and a whole new chart that is going to manifest over time, and also his emphasis on like the rulers of the lots showing a later outcome. I think that's a really good approach to looking at any lot, but then especially just like yeah you've got a second chart when we just kind of turn things here. um
Mm-hmm.
and what we found out about the triplicity rulers of the IC, I'm still a little bit like whoa about that because that's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. That was one of my favorite little things that came up within this text, within this
Yeah.
specific section, not the text as a whole, I mean. Yeah, that was interesting, you know? And to see where these seeds are planted within the tradition that
Mm,
flourished and really grew into the medieval tradition, right? Because this
mm,
is the final Hellenistic author, really. Um, he could even maybe be a case could be made for this being a medieval text, you know? There is ambiguity around when exactly this literature was written and who exactly it was written by. Yeah, and that's something we'll dive into a little more with Laszlo, and his views next week. But yeah, so thank you guys for
Yeah.
going on this, embarking on this journey with us. It's been so fun. Thanks again to the AFA for allowing us to do this.
Yeah.
And yeah, so what do you have coming up? What what else do you have going on?
Well, there's just that class I'm doing next Sunday night, a week from today, on the Decans in ancient Egypt. So their Egyptian names and sort of their system of how they calculated their time and calendar with them, but then how that moved into Greek astrology. And the second issue of the Kaylee Review is soon to be published by Revelor Press. So go and support Kaylee, become a member. You get access to every quarterly journal. You can also purchase it in physical copy. We'll ship it to you, or digitally. Our first version is available digitally for free. If you want to read the first articles, they're available on my website. I have a blog post where there's a link to that. Um, yeah, that's about it right now. How about you?
Yeah. I have the astrology death match coming up.
Mm,
Yeah,
in
so
corner one,
yeah.
Aries Sun coming
Uh-huh.
in.
Right. It's actually really cool. Me and Maury, the person who I dueled with, our synastry is so fascinating. We both got like strong Mars in the
Mm,
Nativity. We both have Moon in the first.
mm.
Cancer and Aries, luminaries, although they're flipped.
Oh, mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
That's very cool, actually.
Yeah. It was really cool to look at our synastry.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Well,
Uh,
I'm excited. When is it
yeah,
happening again?
it's coming up on the 8th, on February
Okay.
8th. Check out Astrology Deathmatch on Twitter for more updates. It will be the initial release will be live streamed on Twitter and YouTube, but there will be a recording of it that exists indefinitely on the internet. So yeah, take a look if you want to see me duel. And that was super fun. That was a really cool thing to do. Uh, yeah, yeah.
I'm excited.
hmm And you guys are not even ready for our next season of the Mercuranians. Oh my goodness.
You're not.
Keep your eyes and ears peeled like bananas and oranges, because we'll we're coming out the gate with something fun.
Yeah. So with that, thank you everybody for being here. And we'll see you in the next one, guys.
Yeah, Mercuranians out.
Cheers.